Welcome back to Between the Before and After, a podcast about the stories that shape us. I'm your host, Coach John McLaren, and each episode I bring you an inspiring guest with a moving story that shines a light on the power of the human spirit. I'm excited to share this story with you, so let's dive in. All right, welcome back again to Between the Before and After. This is a very special episode because it's actually episode 101. And for those listening to the audio version, this is the first episode going to be released in January of 2023. So it's a great story to start the year with, a very, very inspiring one. What also makes this special is that Holly happens to live just up the road from me. By just up the road in Canada, we're talking an hour and a half drive, give or take. You know, we got a lot of landmass here in Edmonton, Alberta, Canada. So welcome to the show, Holly.
Thank you so much for having me, John.
Yeah, it's a pleasure. I stumbled across your story on a platform called Podmatch. And actually, if you listen to episode 100, you'll have heard Alex's story. Alex is the founder of Podmatch. And I asked him if he would be my guest for episode 100. Anyway, so on this platform, I was just kind of scrolling through looking for some really good stories to bring on the show. And then I learned that you were from Edmonton, which is just up the road from me in Red Deer. And I was like, wow, now I have to interview you. Not only do you have like a remarkable story, but like I don't very often get to interview someone from my own province, you know?
Absolutely. I know. I mean, I've been doing a lot of podcasts recently, and most have never heard of Alberta. They
Yeah,
don't even know
yeah,
where that is. I'm just
yeah.
the Canadian, so
Right. Like Edmonton Oilers, anyone? Calgary Flames, like
exactly.
NHL? No? Okay.
Yeah, exactly.
That's right. And recently you wrote a book as well.
I I
Which might as well
did.
plug that right now. What's the title of your book that's going to be released?
The title is called Life Support: Surviving Guillain-Barre Syndrome. So it's a journey of what I went through fighting a rare illness when I was diagnosed in my 20s. And that'll
Yeah.
be released in January, the third week of January.
Okay, well, that's exciting. So those listening to this episode again, you just got a couple of weeks. We'll make sure we put a link in the show notes as well, where people will be able to access that as well. So before we dive into your story, which now we already know there's one very big chapter in that story that we're going to dive into. What are you up to now that you finished writing the book? How do you like to pass your time?
Well, right now I'm still pretty heavily into the book marketing and stuff,
Yeah,
doing lots of podcasts, lots of interviews. So
yeah.
busy with that. But I am a GBS, obviously survivor and advocate. We'll talk about what GBS is and all that. But
Mm,
that's my passion is just educating others about this rare illness and
yeah.
helping others that are going through it now. So I'm heavily involved with the GBS Foundation here in
Mm,
Canada and helping put on awareness campaigns and running conferences and visiting patients in the hospital. And then I do fitness training on the side as well. So, and
just
I,
because you don't have enough going on.
yeah, well, I've been through a lot, and a lot of people go through a lot, and I try to just show others that you know what, you can go through really hard times, and even when you think that you can't get through something, you can. And fitness training is a great avenue to help you through struggles.
Yeah, that's remarkable. I love that. So let's dive into your story. Are you born and raised in Edmonton, or are you transplant to Alberta?
Yeah, I'm Alberta, so born and raised actually in Drayton Valley, which is a
Okay.
small town. But yeah, about an hour and a half west of where you are. So,
Yep.
and then back and forth between there and Edmonton.
Yeah. And so imagine life growing up was reasonably normal for you, or is there any surprises in in that story
No,
as
no,
well?
I had a pretty normal childhood. I back and forth. My parents were divorced when I was about 3 years old, so that's
Okay.
why I moved to Edmonton at that
Okay.
time, and then back and forth between there. So my parents were very close, and they wanted to maintain that relationship between my brothers and I. So even though we grew up in different households, we
Ah,
switched
okay.
back and forth every second weekend my entire childhood.
Really? Okay. So how many siblings do you have?
I have two older brothers.
Okay. And so were they living with one parent and you were living with the other, or?
They were,
Ah.
for mostly for when I was little, and then as we grew up, we kinda switched and changed around, and sometimes it was one brother, sometimes it was both, and sometimes it was just me. So yeah, it was an interesting childhood, in that retrospect, but it was a very happy, loving, supportive family,
Mm-mm.
and, even though my parents were divorced, they remained very close, and we did Christmas every year together, and, just I've always had just a very, very supportive family.
Yeah, that's pretty remarkable. And if I have this right, if I've done my math right, are you in your late 30s currently?
I am, yes. Yeah, I am
Okay.
just turned 38.
38, okay, I'm a little ahead of you, I've ticked over 40, so,
Oh,
um,
awesome.
yeah, hitting the 5th decade of life, it seems, like, crazy to think about, like, "Wow,
Right.
whatever happened to, like, 23-year-old kid that was just doing dumb
Right.
things," you know?
Doesn't seem like that long ago, though.
Yeah, I know, it's crazy how the time goes by. Yeah, so you kinda grew up with, maybe a little more variety and adventure in your growing up years. Did this, affect sort of going to school, or were you able to just stay, like, going to the same school?
Yeah, I went to the same school. In junior high, I ended up moving out to Drayton Valley and switched schools. So, I mean, that was a challenge.
Yeah.
But I think I just having that supportive family, and I was able to just kind of ride the wave and get through it.
Yeah.
And yeah, life was pretty good.
Yeah, yeah. And, graduating high school, did you have sort of any idea, like, "Hey, this is the future I wanna have for myself?" What were you picturing?
I really didn't. So I grew up obviously with divorced parents, and so in
Yeah.
my mind, I wanted a family and I wanted to get married one
Yeah.
day, and I kind of wanted to recreate what I felt like my family kind of failed at, right?
Okay.
And
Yeah.
so I wanted to be a mother and I wanted to get married one day and just live happily ever after. That was really my goal. I didn't
Yeah.
have any major career aspirations. I knew I wanted to have a good career and everything like that. I was very
Mhm.
hardworking, but yeah, I didn't necessarily have a specific career in mind, but I knew that I wanted to be a mother. I grew up with two
Yeah.
older brothers and didn't really have that, I didn't have that female connection with anybody. My brothers were
Right.
very close. They were older than me. I kind of got left out a lot. And so
Yeah,
I
yeah.
knew that when I was older, I knew that I wanted to be a mom, and I especially wanted to have a little girl, to be honest. I just
Yeah.
wanted to, recreate what I felt like I missed out in my childhood.
Yeah, isn't that something to think about and kinda look back on in hindsight, the things that motivate us to go on the path we did? And, so did you choose to go to university, or did you just start working and say, "I'm gonna figure this stuff out," or
Yeah, I started working. I actually moved back to Edmonton and just started working, doing some waitressing jobs, and really didn't know what I wanted to do, and really had no sense of purpose and no idea where my future was going to go. Now I ended up working for a company, ended up doing some admin work, and I ended up getting into human resources. I
okay.
From there I moved I moved over to doing university
Yeah.
and went to school and ended up getting my degree in HR and started working in there. So I loved always helping people. I was always very hardworking,
Yeah.
enjoyed working with other people and helping people's problems, and I was certainly dealing with that a lot
Yeah, yeah,
in
fair enough.
HR.
Yeah.
And life was just it was really going according to plan. I met my now my ex-husband. We're no longer married, but I was 18 when I met him,
Yep.
and we were together for several years, and then I got pregnant. We were married when we would have been 26 years old,
Yeah.
and yeah, life was just it was going on a roll, and it was just perfect.
Yeah, yeah. How did you meet him, and what kinda stuck out about him?
I met him through friends actually, and he
Yeah.
was just funny and charming, and we just had a lot in common.
So this is like pre-internet dating era.
Yes, yes.
Yeah. Yeah. And so you guys got together, um, and when you came down with GBS, were you, was this your first pregnancy, or
It was, yeah. So I had just gotten pregnant, or I
Yeah.
had just given birth. I had a completely perfect, normal pregnancy. I felt really good the entire time. Um, my daughter was born. We named her Casey.
Yeah.
She came out from a C-section just because there was a little bit of complications during birth, but
Mhm.
nothing major. And yeah, like I said, I was 26 years old. I was at home, and life was just going really well. Baby was healthy. I was healthy. We're in the middle of winter, though. Of course, it was
Mm-mm.
in Alberta winter, so it was like
Yeah.
minus 40 when she was born in January. And, yeah, my life just very, very drastically changed.
Yeah, and so when you came down with GBS, was it something that come on very suddenly, or was it you felt unwell for a few days, or was it just it hits you and it hits you hard?
So for my case, it hit me very, very hard and very suddenly,
Yeah.
which in a way kind of actually helped my diagnosis because some people with GBS, it comes on very slowly and doctors aren't quite sure what's going on. But for me, they recognized it right away. So what had happened is I was at home and I was recovering from a C-section and
Mhm.
adjusting to life as a new mom and just getting used to everything, getting used to lack of sleep and getting
Yeah,
used to
just
all the diaper changes and
yeah.
waking up every 2 hours and it was adjustment but I was loving it and I
Yeah.
was just so happy to be a mom and I was just so excited about our future. As you know, in Canada, we get a year off for mat
Yeah.
leave, not in the States where you get like 3 months or something.
Yeah, I couldn't imagine truthfully, like,
I
uh,
know, it's just
oh, and my
wild.
my wife extended hers, like, you can extend up to 18 months, or in some positions you can, which my wife
Yeah,
could, and, because even at 12 months, she was like, "I'm not ready to go back yet," you
yeah.
know?
Yeah, so I was just so excited for our 12 months that we
Yeah.
were gonna have together, and, I just had all these plans. We were gonna take her to the park and go for a walk and put her in her
Yeah, yeah,
stroller, and, I had registered us for these mommy and me classes where we
yeah,
were gonna
yeah.
bond and it was just I had this whole vision in my head of how everything was gonna go. So we're at home and my daughter's just over 3 weeks old. It's minus 40 outside and we're not leaving the house. I barely left the house in the entire 3 weeks that she was first born
Yeah.
because it was so cold.
Yeah.
And, I got all the time in the world and right now, I'm just going to adjust. So barely had even introduced her to anybody. I
Yeah.
mean, obviously close friends and family had come over for a visit.
Yeah.
And all of a sudden I get this tingle in my finger and looking back now, I know that that was my first symptom, but I didn't at the time. I thought that I had burnt myself or something because it was kind of numb and tingly.
Yeah.
And I remember looking at my finger and there was nothing wrong. And I was just kind of brushed it off. And then that night, I was going to put my daughter down. And when I was walking up the stairs, I noticed that my legs were kind of weak and kind of heavy and it was odd, like, it just felt like it was really, really challenging to lift my leg up on, the stair, and I remember thinking, like, "This is kinda strange, like, am I getting sick or am I getting the flu?" Like, I just feel really,
Mm,
really
mm.
bagged, and, of course, the first thing I think of was, "Well, you know what? You're a new mom, and this is all new to you, and you just haven't slept in days, and you just really need a good night's sleep." So I just kind of ignored it, put her down, and then actually within 15 minutes, I'm back downstairs, and I get this pain in my neck, and it's very sudden and severe just out of nowhere. And I'm clutching the back of my neck and I'm thinking like, okay, what did I do? Did I just like crank my neck strange or
Mm.
like did I pull a muscle or so I'm on Google because that's what you do, right? You Google
Right.
your symptoms and I'm Googling and it's telling me you've got a pinched nerve. And so
Right, right.
I'm thinking, okay, that actually makes sense because I'm kind of actually having a little bit of weakness in my leg. So it's probably a pinched nerve in my neck
Mm.
and it's causing weakness and even this tingling. And so, oh, it's fine. It's not a big deal. I'm just gonna, maybe see a doctor tomorrow or something like that. So just
Yeah.
kind of brushed it off. But everything just continued getting worse. So the tingling in my finger got worse and the pain in my neck got worse to the point where I was in tears and I'm taking pain meds and nothing's working and I'm just distraught going like what is happening like what did I break my neck like
Right.
what
Is
is
this all
happening
and this is all the same night? Like, things are progressing
this
rapidly,
is
or
all within a couple hours, yeah.
okay. Yeah.
Yeah, so my daughter's still upstairs sleeping. I go up the stairs and again I'm trying to walk and I'm noticing that my legs are just really, really weak. And in my head, I'm still thinking it's a pinched nerve. It's just really, really bad one. It's a really painful one. So I go to bed that night thinking that, you know what, I'm just gonna take a few more Advil and I'm sure
Right,
that the
right.
pain will go away and in the morning I'll wake up and feel better.
Yeah.
I'm laying in bed and I cannot sleep. The pain is too bad. I get down on the ground because my ex-husband, he's in bed and he had to go to work in the morning and so I didn't want to wake him up. So I lay down on the ground and I'm trying to do all these stretches with my neck and I'm trying to do these yoga poses. I'm googling all these treatments for pinched nerves. Nothing
Yeah.
is helping. At 3 in the morning my daughter wakes up. So again, this is like within 6 hours of my
Mm.
of this all happening. And 3 in the morning, my daughter wakes up, and I stand to go to her, and my legs basically completely gave out on me, and I fell. And I'm like, okay, something is seriously wrong. And again, still thinking it's a pinched nerve, but I stand back up and I'm able to kind of stand and compose myself. And I'm thinking something is wrong. I need to go to
Mm.
the hospital. I'm in tears. The pain is so bad. So I had my then husband, he dropped me off at the hospital. I didn't want to bring my newborn, of course, to the hospital. She's still so new, right? And I don't want her to get sick.
Yeah.
So I just told him to drop me off, and I'll give you a call in a couple hours. And yeah, I had no idea that that would be the last time that I would step foot outside of a hospital for over 3, 4 months.
Yeah. Wow. Okay. So you walked in under sort of your own power?
I did. I walked in and I was weak, but only
Yeah.
to myself. Like nobody else would have been able to tell that. It everything felt heavy.
Yeah.
Everything felt like it was really challenging to do. But if you would have seen me in person, you would have said, "No, no, you look fine." So I go into the hospital. I tell them that I'm feeling really weak. I'm dealing with pain. They were able to get me in to see a doctor fairly quickly. That doctor says, "I have no idea what's wrong with you." And that's very scary to hear when
Yeah.
I mean, I'm in
Ooh.
my 20s and I'm thinking, "What do you mean? Don't doctors know everything?" And I was
Right.
just blown away. But he was like, "You know what, though? I'm gonna find somebody that does. So we're gonna call a neurologist to come see you. He's gonna come down in a few hours whenever he gets a chance." So he was very busy. So just be patient and wait in your chair, and we're gonna give you some pain meds for the neck.
Right.
So
Right.
I sit in my chair and I fall asleep. This is again, like by this point, it's about 5 a.m. Fall asleep in the chair in the ER, and I wake up to the neurologist waking me up at about 7 a.m. by now, and the pain in my neck is completely gone. And I'm almost embarrassed that I'm at the ER with no pain, and I'm like,
Right.
oh, do I even need to be here? Do I even need to see him? And so he tests my strength, and he has me push and pull, and he's having me like push my feet against his arms, and he's like, "Yeah, you're very, very weak, and you're rapidly losing the ability to kind of move your arms." And I don't see it, but he immediately says, "I think I know what's wrong with you, and I think you have something called Guillain-Barre syndrome." And at the time, I could not pronounce that. it's
Right. Right.
it's French,
Yeah.
but he says it's, "I think you have Guillain-Barre syndrome," and I said, "I don't know what that is. Like, is that a disease? Is like what's a syndrome?" I had no idea. I was in my
Mm. Mm.
20s, completely healthy. I had literally only ever gone to the hospital for a migraine, I think, a few times before, and had never had any health problems. So I'm thinking, okay, so just give me some medication and then I'm going to go home, right? And he says, "No, unfortunately, GBS, it's a rare autoimmune disorder, and basically what's happening is it's attacking your nerves." So what happens with GBS is that it basically sees an attack on the body, and then your
Mhm.
immune system begins to basically start to attack the nerves, so the peripheral nerves. So those are the nerves
Mm.
that are not attached to the brain or the spinal cord. So all
Yeah.
the nerves in the rest of your body. And basically, what it does is it starts to paralyze you. And so we don't know how severe this is going to get, is what he tells me. And I remember thinking, well, I'm sure it's not going to be that bad. Just give me some treatment. I got to go home. I got a baby. I'm in my
Yeah.
20s. I'm going to be fine. Just give me the medication and then I can go home. And he's like, "No, you need to be admitted." And it was very, very scary and terrifying. And they're telling me, "Your family needs to come here immediately. This is an emergency. Your daughter needs to come here." I was still breastfeeding, obviously. So they said, "Bring her here." And I remember thinking, well, she's a newborn. She shouldn't come here. And they said, "Doesn't matter. Bring her here." And that was when I kind of realized how severe this was. And very quickly, everything just kind of spiraled. So I was all of a sudden the pain came back, the medication kind of wore off, and I was in
Oh,
more
yeah.
pain than I ever thought I could imagine. Basically, inflammation in every part of my body from all the nerves. They moved me to a neurology ward. I was just completely out of it, tired, obviously, from barely sleeping. And my
Mm,
daughter,
mm.
they bring my daughter, and my family comes, and everyone's rushing to the hospital to be with me. And I'm just getting worse. All of a sudden, I'm losing the ability to move my arms, and then I'm losing the ability to move my legs, and then I can't move at all anymore. And eventually, the paralysis actually spread up to my chest and affected my
Yeah.
diaphragm. And that was when I was rushed to ICU and a ventilator. Basically, I was attached to a ventilator and put on life support. And that all happened within 72 hours.
Wow. Yeah. That's crazy. And yeah, your life is never gonna be it was never the same after that.
It was never the same.
Yeah. So from that point, you're in ICU, you're on a ventilator. I'm guessing, are you in an induced coma?
No, and everybody thinks that.
Yeah.
They picture ICU that that's what it would be like, and it
Mhm.
wasn't. And that's why I do actually like to share my story and bring
Sure,
awareness,
sure.
because absolutely there are some people that go through induced comas and stuff like that, but I was not. And although I was heavily sedated for a big portion of it,
Right, right.
there's a
Yeah.
lot that I actually remember, and I was very coherent, knew exactly what was happening, understood what was going on. The doctors were telling me, "You're going to get better." GBS is an acute illness. And what that means is that once the GBS, once it's done attacking the nerves, then you'll start to recover. But it's just going to take time. And so we just have to get through this phase. We just have to get your lung strength back, and then
Mm,
you'll be able
mm.
to get out of ICU. And unfortunately, that didn't happen for a very long time. So I was actually in ICU for almost 3 months. My
Wow.
lungs did not show any signs of improvement for a very long time. I was completely paralyzed that for most of that time. I couldn't move. I could not speak. Obviously, I had a tube first in my mouth that they later moved it to my throat,
Mhm.
and paralyzed. Yeah, basically from the eyes down. So I communicated with my family by blinking. They would actually
Yeah.
point to letters on a piece of paper, and they would, each time that they picked a letter I wanted to form sentences with, then I would blink. And my daughter was there. She was there with me every single day. Obviously, I had to stop breastfeeding because of all the medication.
Right, right.
But they were putting her on my lap and putting her on my chest every day and beside me in my bed, just trying to keep that connection alive. But it was such a challenging time for me, knowing that she was there with me, and I wasn't being able to take care of her, because
Mm, mm.
I had this whole life planned for us, and then I felt like it was just totally just taken away from me. And now
Right.
I'm in ICU, and she's getting older, and every day is going by, and I'm not getting better. And I truly felt like my life was over and that I was never going to get better. And they kept telling
Yeah.
me that I would and that I would recover. But when you're in ICU and you can't move, and you can't speak, and you can't communicate, and you
Can't breathe on your own.
can't breathe, and you can't even reach out and touch my daughter or say I love you to her or hold her bottle or anything like that. I just felt very, very broken and very worthless for a very, very long time.
And you mentioned that during this time, pardon me, that you were sedated, but you were coherent.
Yes.
That's a very interesting experience to go through because I wonder how many people go through something like this, but maybe never recover. And they're so you experience what it's like to be trapped in a body that doesn't function, but with a fully functioning mind that's coherent and aware.
Absolutely. And even it's really good awareness even for medical professionals, because I mean we had doctors and nurses and talking about me when I'm right there, and it was just wild to me to be talked about, but not to have somebody communicate with me, even though I could hear everything going on.
Right. And was there, I mean, because I guess you can't really move anything. At some point, did you communicate to someone who is, you know, a family member or something that I can hear everything going on?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think my family was able to catch on pretty quickly as the pain got under control. Basically, they did lower my sedatives, so I appeared obviously more coherent as well. So they could
Mhm.
tell that I could understand, and they were talking to me, and I was able to, once they moved the tube to my throat, then I was able to mouth words, and so that's how we basically communicated for a good month and a half. It was actually easier than getting the letters spelled out for me. So
Right. When you say move tube to the throat, does that mean it, like, goes through your nose to the back of your throat versus into your mouth, or is there just a
no, no,
smaller tube?
no. So basically, it started right in my mouth is where the
Yeah.
tube went, and then they
Yeah.
moved the tube. They pulled the tube and they actually inserted it right here.
Oh,
So I
it's like a
actually have a
tracheotomy?
scar. Yeah, I had a tracheotomy. So
Yeah.
that's where the tube was for the rest of the 2 months.
Right. Yeah. And then when it comes time to, and you mentioned you got to this place where, I mean, you felt very hopeless, very, very worthless, very helpless. You're still, thankfully, it sounds like you did have some people supporting you that were staying by your side and encouraging you along the way. Where do you find, I guess, since hope and encouragement in this kind of situation
Oh,
when you
it
want to
was
give up?
It was so hard, and I wanted to give up so many times, and everybody kept telling me, "You're so strong, and you can get through this, and you can handle this," and I just felt like I couldn't, and I
Mhm.
felt almost ashamed because I hated that people kept telling me, "You're so strong," and in my mind, I didn't feel strong because I really truly wanted to give up, and I didn't believe that I was gonna get better. And there were times where I actually tried to convince my family members, my doctors, my nurses. I said, just please let me die. Just please shut off this machine, which was a very hard for me to admit to people because
Mhm.
people were saying you're such a fighter, and I didn't feel like a fighter. But I did find hope in tiny little things, and obviously number one was my daughter, just
Yeah.
knowing that, you know what, I want to get back to her, and she deserves to have a mother
Mm.
there with her, and I can't give up. So she was a huge motivation. I also had amazing nurses and family members, and they decorated my whole wall with photos of my
Oh,
life and my family and my friends. And just looking at that and remembering what my life was like before, I really wanted to just fight so hard, not only for my daughter and my friends and stuff, but for myself, just to get back to
yeah.
me. So I knew I
Yeah.
had to do that. But I think the biggest inspiration for me was actually meeting another GBS survivor. So the hospital that I was at, they had dealt with a case of GBS before, and they brought in this patient that had actually recovered from GBS. And he came into ICU and he walked in as if he had never gone through what he did. Turns out he was actually in the exact same ICU room that I was in
Wow.
a couple years before, and he was in the exact same position. He had been paralyzed on life support for 4 months, and he had recovered, and appeared to have nothing wrong with him. And so that was a huge motivation to see him standing beside my bed, breathing on his own, walking. He had young kids with him, and to see him being a dad. It just really inspired me, and I realized that, you know what, if he can get through this disease, then so can I.
So this highlights a really, really, really important point. And it's partly why I even have this podcast in a sense, is because I want to capture stories like this because I imagine kind of what you're describing there, like everybody else can say you're strong, you're gonna get through this. We've seen people get through this, all this kind of stuff. But when you saw the living, breathing proof right in front of you, then something shifts and you go, okay, this is possible. Because I'm not just hearing pardon me, a story. I am seeing a living example of this.
Absolutely, yes. And when you're going through, especially GBS, they were telling me that this is rare, and many of our nurses have never seen this before, and it's a very rare illness. And although it affects about 2 out of every 100,000 people. So I mean, like in the city of Edmonton, that would be about 10 people on average that are getting it every year. So
Okay.
rare, but still people getting it, right? But when I'm
Yeah.
in ICU and I'm dealing with all the pain and the suffering and the struggle and the paralysis and not being able to move my body, and doctors are talking about it like it's just so foreign, and I've never heard of it, and everyone that we're telling, our family members, friends, no one's ever heard of it. So in
Mm.
my eyes, I felt like I was like one in a billion. I felt like I
Yeah.
that no one else could ever possibly understand what I'm going through. And so when
Right.
he walked
Yeah.
in that door, yeah, it was okay, there is somebody out there that's gone through this, and he did it, so and so can I.
And, at that stage, where were you at? Like, how were you able to, still communicate by mouthing words, and did he share anything in particular with you?
I was, yeah. He just basically answered a million questions that my family had and just talked about all the different experiences and that he went through, the struggles that he went through. And it just kind of explained what life was like for him during recovery. So we kind of knew what to expect. He had actually created a video of his journey that his family had videotaped basically from the beginning of him in the hospital. And so he actually showed that to us and said, like, this is kind of what the progression looks like. So we kind of just knew what to expect
Mm,
and what sort of things were to come. And from that point on, my family actually started videotaping and taking pictures of myself as well, just so that they had something to compare myself to. So when I started moving my fingertip, that was the first thing that happened. It was after 6 weeks. And it's
yeah,
kind of funny how that was my first symptom. And that was what came back first was my fingertip moving.
how about that?
And at the time, my family was just ecstatic. They were so excited. It meant that that's improvement, right? But for me, it was really hard because that didn't mean anything to me. That didn't mean I was getting out of ICU. Doesn't mean I was better. Doesn't
Right,
mean
right.
that I'm going home anytime soon. So, but they kept track of every tiny little movement. They actually made stars and put them above my bed so that I could see. So every time I had my fingertip moved, the first time I moved my head, the first time, because I was like literally like a baby, like learning how to relearn everything. So my head, I had
Yeah,
to regain that muscle, the muscles in my neck to be able to hold my head up properly. And then my hands started moving, and so my wrist, I had to work on my wrist strength. And eventually I was able to put the bottle up against my wrist, and I could hold my daughter kind of by my arm and feed her in bed, which was a huge accomplishment. And so my
mm,
parents put the stars above my bed, and that was just a huge motivation to see those stars above my bed and go, okay, I am making progress, even though it didn't always feel like it. And my family showing me the videos of the weeks before of when I'm just at my worst, just to be able to look back and see that journey progressing.
I think this highlights something else that's really important. See, you're a coach as well as an advocate, and I work with people in a different kind of transformation journey, obviously, but along the way, it's a part of the human condition when we're struggling through something to get discouraged because it's difficult. And again, one of the things that's helping you to get through this is seeing these little tiny markers of progress and watching them add up. You know, and
Ye-
maybe in your head, there wasn't necessarily this, I'm gonna, do an overhead squat or something like that again. It was, okay, I'm gonna move my feet, I'm gonna lift my legs, I'm gonna stand to my feet, and so on. And there's just these little milestones along the way, like tracking little bits of progress, because otherwise our attention just like our attention just goes to the thing that's very present in our mind right now. Look how stuck I am. And it's like, well, look how far
Absolutely.
you've come.
Absolutely. And my mother, I will say that she played a huge part in that because when I'm talking to this other gentleman that had recovered and he's
Mm,
walking and in my head I'm trying to imagine what walking is going to be like because I can barely even move my hand, and it was
yeah.
so overwhelming, and obviously it was so hard and painful, and I just couldn't even imagine doing it. And so my mom was like, let's not worry about that, let's just worry about the tiny little steps that you have to worry about right now, which number one was actually
Mm,
breathing. That was the first thing that I had to learn how to do, and until I learned how to breathe, I didn't even need to focus on how I was going to learn how to walk. So she really drilled that in, and let's just focus on one step at a time, and let's focus on the step right in front of us. And that's breathing. So breathing became my first kind of major accomplishment that I reached. So basically, I had no idea how I was going to be able to do it. They said you have to learn how to breathe and go be without the ventilator for 72 hours. And after 72 hours, then they can take out the tube from your neck. And we tried for 15 seconds the first time, and I felt like I was drowning. I felt like I was
yeah, yeah,
running out of air. I felt like I was going to die. I was screaming, but I was screaming silently because my vocal cords didn't work,
right.
and I was hyperventilating, and they put it back on and they calmed me down, and I'm like, I'm never going to be able to do this. I couldn't even do that for 15 seconds. And they
Mm,
assured me that as I got stronger, as my lungs got stronger, it would get easier. And I wanted to believe them. It was really, really hard.
Yeah.
But the gentleman that recovered from GBS, he actually brought me a sign because I was struggling so hard, and I was having such a hard time, and I knew that he was the only one that really understood. And so I actually had my parents call him, and he came to visit again. And I said, I don't know how you did this. How did you learn how to breathe on your own?
Yeah.
And he brought me this sign, and he taped it right to my wall right in front of me, and it said, "Courage doesn't always roar. Sometimes it's the quiet voice saying, I will just try again tomorrow." And I remember just thinking, okay, I can just try again tomorrow. And so that's what I did. I just promised myself that I would always just keep trying, even if it felt so hard. And even if I felt like I gave up in that moment, I could try again tomorrow. So I
Mm.
did that, and so we progressed to 30 seconds off the ventilator and then progressed to a minute and then 15 minutes, and as time went on, I got a little bit stronger and it got a little bit easier.
So I'm
Still dealing
curious.
with. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah. So because you're is try like, 'cause I think the same thing. How do you learn to breathe again? Like, was the expectation that somehow, like, there's something written into your body's, like, wiring that it knows that these muscles need to move and they just were so atrophied that they couldn't move?
Exactly. So it's your lungs and your diaphragm specifically are exactly like, they're a muscle, right? And so they
Yeah,
just
yeah.
need to strengthen, and as they get stronger, then obviously the work gets easier.
Right, yeah. So you're really in terms of learning to breathe again, it's like getting a little bit of strength and endurance back because we just take for granted breathing.
Yeah.
And these muscles that go 24 hours a day that we don't even think about, the level of endurance they have to expand and contract a rib cage, the diaphragm going up and down and so on, like, it's remarkable, and
Yeah.
I imagine now you have, like, such appreciation for the ability to breathe with relative ease.
Absolutely, and when I was going through it, it just felt so hard, and every time even at, like, 15 minutes, I remember I did it, and then I that was my goal that day, and I reached my 15 minutes, and at 15 minutes and 1 second, I said, "Put me back on."
Yeah.
And I started crying, and they were like, "Why are you crying? You reached your goal." And I was like, "I did 15 minutes. How am I supposed
Mm.
to do 72 hours? How am I supposed to breathe forever?" It is so challenging. I feel like I'm running a marathon that I've never trained for. It was just so hard to do, and it felt like it was impossible. And at many times during that journey, I didn't believe that I was going to be able to do it, and I had
Mm.
convinced in my mind that, you know what, you may be in ICU forever, or you may have basically be on life support forever. I truly didn't know, but what I did promise myself is that I would just keep trying, and every day was a new day, and let's just see what happens. And 15 minutes turned into a couple hours, and then a couple hours turned into 6 hours and 12 and 24, 48, and then eventually I was 72 hours and I got the tube out of my throat.
Wow. So after 72 hours, did you have to do 72 hours more than once or
No, I only had to do it once. So basically
yeah,
what happened from there, interesting enough, is they kind of figure, well, once you're at that point, then your lungs should be strong enough to maintain that. And so they took the tube out, and they put a little button basically that went into my throat, and they said, let's leave you in ICU for 2 more days,
yeah,
and if everything goes well, then you can just take that button out. If obviously it doesn't, then they would put the tube back in. Obviously that didn't happen. I just was able to completely breathe, and it felt normal by that point. It felt
okay,
completely normal, and life was just kind of all of a sudden given to me back, and I had this ability to breathe, and I was still very weak. I still like
yeah,
I couldn't move my legs at that point. My arm strength was coming back, but I got out of ICU. I was moved to a basically a neurology ward, with a lot of stroke patients. I was 26. I was the youngest person on the ward. Everyone else was like 70 and 80 years old, and
yeah, yeah,
stuck out like a sore thumb. But at that point, I realized I could not even believe that I just overcome what I did. I could not believe that I had just learned how to breathe and I had accomplished that, and something that I had thought was so impossible to do, even up until the day before the tube came out.
mhm, mhm,
And now I had accomplished that, and I knew that I would never set limitations on myself again, because it was my mind that was telling me that I couldn't do it. and
Right.
I had done it, and I had proved
Yeah.
myself that I could
Yeah.
do it. And so from there on, it just really sparked a fire in me to keep going, no matter what. No matter what I
Yeah.
was going through, just had to keep trying, just had to keep going. And so from there, I started physiotherapy. I had to learn how to basically like just re-strengthen every single muscle in every part of my body. So I
Yeah.
had to
Yeah.
use putty to learn how to strengthen my fingers and
Okay.
work on my fine motor skills, like
Yeah.
buttoning shirts and
Right.
fastening safety pins. And then from there, I used 1 pound weights to do dumbbell curls. I was basically learned how to use cutlery. I learned how to feed myself. Eventually, they taught me how to like hold my daughter and how to strengthen my arms that way. And eventually, I was able to get out of bed, get out of the hospital bed. I was able to stand. From there, I moved into a wheelchair. I was in a wheelchair for quite a while, and that was
Mm.
actually a wonderful freedom because I was able to get out of bed and
Right. Yeah.
get
Yeah.
out of the hospital room and go around the hospital grounds and even go over to coffee shops. And so I had these glimmers of hope to keep me going. And
Yeah.
I just knew that I just had to keep fighting and keep going. And eventually, I moved to a rehab hospital where I learned to walk again. And I first walked with a walker, did that for several weeks, and
Yeah.
eventually moved to a cane. And then I was able to walk on my own. And I left the hospital after 126 days in the hospital. My
Yeah.
daughter was almost 6 months old.
So I'm curious in this because I feel like kind of being trapped in your own body and coherent itself might have a traumatizing effect. Was there some sort of psychological requiree or not requiree, what's the word I'm looking for? Rehabilitation in a sense. Like, did you have to work through any of that? Like, were there any recurring, flashbacks, visions, nightmares, terrors, anything like that? Or was that kind of all
It's
worked through in the experience?
it's wild. I know a lot of people that deal with PTSD and a lot of trauma from being obviously paralyzed and being on a ventilator. And I did go through that while I was in ICU. I had a lot of hallucinating, a lot of traumatic dreams and nightmares, and just really not understanding where I was at all times. But as I got better, and I really don't know why I got so lucky, but I really didn't have any flashbacks after that. And I think it
Mm,
was partially just because I was just so grateful. I could breathe again and I could move my arms again. And I just was just so pleased and so grateful to be back to being a mother and back to having my life that I was just able to just move forward and just move on from it.
wow. Yeah, that is quite remarkable, and I feel like we're like just scratching the surface of your story because, of course, there's so much there's time that's passed between now and that time. That was 11 years ago that you had come through that. So then, obviously, your path in life has changed, having gone through that
Greatly.
experience. Yeah, greatly.
Greatly, yeah. It completely changed my life. When you're in your 20s, you think you're invincible and you think
Mhm.
that you're never going to get sick. And if you do get sick, it's going to be when you're 80 and you've got your whole life ahead of you. And when I was in ICU, I truly didn't believe that I was ever going to get out of there and that I
Mm,
was ever going to be able to do any of the things that I wanted. And I was just so hopeless for so long and very angry at the world and just frustrated that, you know what, I had all these plans for my life and then all of a sudden I couldn't do any of them. And so when I recovered, all of a sudden I had my life back. And it was
yeah,
like I was given a second chance. And so everything was different. And I promised myself I was going to live things very differently. For one, my view on the world changed. I realized how quickly life can change, how I could go from completely healthy 1 minute to paralyzed on life support in less than 72 hours. And so I started traveling more. I started spending more time
yeah,
with friends. I just put more effort into my relationships. I also started making plans for things that I've always wanted to do. I became more adventurous. I started
mm,
climbing mountains. I started working out. I started just really appreciating my body and what it was capable of doing. And when I was in a rehab hospital, I met so many people that were in wheelchairs for the rest of their lives and they would actually never be able to walk again. So that gave me this. appreciation for the ability to walk and the ability to climb mountains and go for runs. And so I
Yeah.
became much more active and just really just started living life to the fullest.
Yeah. And so, you got into, I think, being a trainer as well, like a personal trainer. Was that kind of the first career you had, or like, because at a certain point in time, just as you're learning to walk and whatnot, you're having to figure out how to be some independent again because, maybe there was some health benefits in healthcare that you was supporting you financially going through this time, but at a certain point, just like getting taken off the ventilator, that gets taken away as well.
Yeah, so I once I was home, I wasn't completely recovered. Although I looked like I looked completely healthy and I looked good and everything. And I was walking, but I couldn't walk for long distances. Even like squatting down or getting down on the floor or walking long periods going upstairs was really, really challenging for me. And I was supposed to go back to work. I was working in human resources,
Hmm.
and before I went back to work, they said, "Well, we need to send you to for an assessment and see basically where your health is at, just to make sure that you're ready to go back to work." And I mean, I worked at an office setting and at a
Mhm,
desk,
mhm.
and so there was no reason why I couldn't potentially do my job from a desk. So they sent me to a physiotherapist, and the physiotherapist said, "Yeah, you've definitely got some struggles. There's a lot of things that you still can't do." And I remember thinking, you know what? It's okay because at least I'm not in ICU, and at least I can breathe, and I can be at home with my daughter, and it's okay, and this is fine if this is the best I'm going to get. And that physiotherapist was like, "Don't you want to be better than that? And I can do that. I can get you there." And he basically kicked my ass, and he got me doing 3-hour workouts, basically 3 times a week, and
Mhm.
he really showed me what my body was capable of. And from there, I basically got into the best shape of my life, and I fell in love with fitness. I fell in love with just the way that fitness made me feel, not
Yeah.
only physically, but mentally as well. And I started sharing my story. I started talking about what it was like to go through GBS and bringing awareness to it because all of my friends, again, they're all in their 20s. They had never heard of it before. They just couldn't believe that I had gone through what I did. And I started social media pages talking about Guillain-Barre syndrome. And from there, my life just went on this whole new path. And all of a sudden I had people from around the world reaching out to me, talking about how they had gone through GBS too, and
Right.
how they had gone through it 20 years ago and they'd never met anybody with GBS before,
Right, right.
or patients that they were in the hospital and they were maybe just out of ICU and they were wanting to talk to somebody. And so
Yeah.
people were asking me, how did you recover and how did you get into the best shape of your life and how did you get into fitness? I was posting a lot of, as you see on social media, you see a lot of before and afters. And I had this before picture of me in ICU, completely sedated and just looking like I'm near death. And then
Mhm.
this after of me in the gym in the best shape of my life. And so people were like, how did you go from that to this? And I want to know. And I couldn't exactly tell them. I didn't have an educated answer for them. And so I wanted to. And so I went back and took my fitness training certification so
Mm.
that I could learn more about basically how the body can recover and get through from that.
Yeah, I mean, the body is remarkable, as is the mind, to be able to bounce back from these things. And so, yeah, and so now you said you spent a lot of your time as an advocate for GBS. I guess the one question that might be on people's minds is, how does one come down with GPS? How do you acquire it?
So GBS, it's an autoimmune disorder. So it's very similar
Mhm.
to multiple sclerosis or lupus. Basically, the problem lies within our own bodies. So
Mm.
what happens is something happens to the body and basically it sees it as an attack and then begins attacking like your immune system will typically do for anything that's going on, and then from there it continues attacking and it fails to stop and it starts attacking itself is what happens. So
Yeah.
generally, it's some sort of virus or maybe like a bacterial infection, or it can come on from the flu, from surgery. So there's a lot of triggers that do bring on Guillain-Barre syndrome. Only about 50 to 60%, I think, of the cases are they able to actually pinpoint a trigger. Some cases they aren't. They have no idea
Right, yeah.
why, it just happens. But a lot of the cases they are able to look back, and it's usually about 2 to 4 weeks after something. So, like I said, sometimes it's surgery, the
Right.
flu.
In your case,
Uh,
having a
if
C-section or
Yeah, for my case, it was going through pregnancy or childbirth, or the C-section. They're not exactly sure, but it is quite common actually after birth. So I've met
yeah.
many, many women over the years that have had GBS shortly after giving birth.
Right, yeah, and was your case particularly on the scale I imagine not every case is exactly the same. Was your case particularly severe or
It was. So my acute phase was very severe. So only about 30% of GBS patients actually end up on a ventilator. So
Mhm,
the rest will obviously deal with a lot of weakness. There's some very mild cases that they may even not even have to be hospitalized. They may be have some struggles walking, and then they'll have to do some physiotherapy and to re-strengthen, but they won't
hmm,
even be in the hospital. Yeah, it's quite a wild disorder. But then it can range from more severe where you end up in the hospital and end up on a ventilator. But my recovery was actually quite quick, and not everybody does recover completely. And I am very fortunate.
mhm,
I
mhm.
know that hard work played a very important role, but at the same time, very, very fortunate that I was able to recover as well as I did.
Well, I think having all of that tremendous support as well made a big difference for all those days that you wanted to give up and not keep going,
I,
basically. So having people in your corner.
yes, absolutely. And I think that's a huge lesson for anybody that's going through a hard time is having that support system. And like you said, is just finding somebody else that maybe has gone through what you can to just be your kind of mentor and somebody to guide you through it.
Yeah. I mean, it speaks to the value of like, even like coaching and mentorship and things like that, but
Mhm.
just having support. Because I think one of the worst ideas we ever came up with, and like maybe it seems to be a Western idea, that we should be able to figure everything out by ourselves. And asking for help is a problem. And like it's the best thing in the world you could ever do is ask for help and learn from somebody else's experience rather than trying to struggle and fight and do this all by yourself.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's really why
And
I try to to bring awareness and talk about my disorder and talk about what I went through and how I overcame it, because I don't want anyone to be like I was when I was in ICU, believing that this is the end, there is no hope, there is
mm,
no
mm,
reason
mm.
to fight, because that's how I felt for a very long time. And so I really want my story to remind people that, you know what, you can go from rock bottom where I was and recover from that both mentally and physically. And if I can go through what I did, then there's so many people that can get through hard things as well.
And from the time that you had gone through your GBS experience to, I mean, you're speaking, you're advocating, you're visiting other people who might be going through or having gone through it. Have you seen like the understanding of it evolve and maybe the treatment and care of it evolve? And does that make a difference? In 2023, someone having GBS would probably hopefully have a different experience than you would have had back in, was it 2012 or 2011 that this happened to you?
Yeah, 2011. Yeah, I think in a lot of ways it has improved, but it really depends on the hospital and where you are located. Obviously, if
Fair
you're
enough.
in a if you're in a very small rural community where a doctor has never heard of GBS and has certainly never dealt with it before, they might not understand kind of what we go through. So with GBS, with that, how it's affecting the nerves is it can sometimes cause severe inflammation, and what that does is cause sensitivity. And so when I was in ICU, it felt like somebody would, like if somebody would touch me, it felt like somebody was stabbing me because my nerves were basically not
Mm,
firing properly. And so it was very, very painful. And a lot of doctors don't understand that and don't even realize that. And so nurses and doctors are coming and trying to move you around, not realizing that it's causing the most excruciating pain.
right.
A lot of doctors didn't realize that, you know what, I am coherent and I can hear you. And that's actually why I wrote my book. It is aimed at a lot, not only GBS survivors, obviously,
Mm,
but
mm,
it's
mm.
also aimed at medical professionals to
Yeah.
understand what it is that we go through. And I do think that my story, as well as social media has made it a lot easier for people to share their stories. as well online. And so it is able to get into the hands of medical professionals that are dealing with it.
Yeah. Well, Holly, it's been such a pleasure chatting with you. I know I'd have dozens of more questions, but we're going to come to the end of this episode. Maybe I'll just have to bring you back and chat more about your ongoing life after GBS. But the thing I always like to ask my guests is, for someone who's been listening to this conversation, they've been hearing your very, very remarkable story. If you What is one sort of nugget or piece of wisdom or hope that you would like people to take away from hearing this conversation today?
Just that, you know what, if I can go through what I can, then you can overcome what you're going through. And I know it doesn't feel like that at the moment, but I always just go back to that sign that I had taped above my bed, and I literally have that sign still taped to the wall in my office. And it's that courage doesn't always roar. It's the quiet voice saying, I can try again tomorrow. And so just promising that you'll never give up, no matter what it is that you're working towards, no matter what struggle it is that you're trying to overcome, just not giving up, and allowing yourself to, you know what, take breaks and know that it's not going to be easy, and know that if you're struggling, that's okay. You don't have to feel like you're strong, and you don't have to feel like you're just this powerful person that can handle this. You don't have to feel like that. All you have to do is just keep trying and keep.
Much for being on. Thank you for the amazing work that you do and for sharing your amazing and inspiring story.
Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you so much for tuning in to Between the Before and After. If you've enjoyed this episode, please subscribe and leave a review, because that helps this podcast to reach and inspire more people. I love exploring the stories that take place between the before and after, the powerful experiences that shape who we become, and I love human potential. I love the possibilities that lie within us. So whatever you may be up against, I hope these stories inspire you, because if you're still here, your story's not done yet, so keep moving forward.